Cut all forward traffic. Now. The command struck harder than the tremor beneath Station Aegir's floor plating. On the observation deck of the Andros array, a relay dock parked along the outer edge of Earth's Neptune corridor, 6 civilian vessels froze mid-vector. Bulk freighters, research liners, and a slow-haul passenger cruiser tilted off-path under emergency override, their beacons blinking confusion into the void. And just beyond them, past the debris field that rimmed the Tarsis Gate, the Dominion fleet arrived. No dramatics, no warning, just arrival. The lead ship, the one Earth's analysts had labeled void canonical during a previous intelligence sweep, didn't activate shields or weapon bays. It simply halted above Saturn's moon Titan, visible from Earth-based telescopes with the naked eye. The scale wasn't what chilled the assembly, it was the position. The Dominion had parked their judgment directly over the most visible planet-side observatory, not a tactical move, a symbolic one. By the time the broadcast began, most major governments had already routed power to hardened lines. On every screen, from Martian civic halls to lunar habitat domes, a single Dominion sigil pulsed amber, rotating fractal forms woven from living language structures. The translation feed ran below it in silence. Surrender your system's sovereignty, or face annihilation. In the sublevels beneath Antarctica, the Aegis Corps responded not with alarm, but with a sealed door meeting called by override code Strat Den 413. No press, no advisors, no outreach. Rain Torvek stepped into the chamber before the lights fully warmed. He'd expected silence. He got contempt. "You waited for this," spat Vice Director Malik, hunched over a heads-up display showing orbital choke points already outmaneuvered. "We told the Council that Red Veil was mythology, a misallocated budget, and now you expect—" "I expect nothing," Torvek said, voice even. "I'm here because the Dominion arrived, and they didn't fire. You think that means peace? I think that means ritual." The panel fell quiet. Malik sat back slowly, tapping off the display. Rain Torvek wasn't a warmonger. He wasn't even supposed to be in the room. Discredited after proposing psychological countermeasures over traditional armament, he had been sent to manage Martian atmospheric projects, quiet exile, until now. "Show me the status of the Archangel Vault," Torvek said. Director Jora raised a brow. "You think the vault's relevant?" "I think they just issued a cultural ultimatum," he replied. "That's not military doctrine, that's belief." One tap brought up the secured interface. Behind a 10-digit alphanumeric barrier lived the Archangel Vault, data stripped from a shattered Dominion skirmisher years ago during the Belt reforms. The file's memory clusters had remained inert. Linguistic strands Earth's AIs couldn't align with logic maps. Semantic architecture unlike anything human software had passed, meaning tied not to syntax, but ritual sequence. Until 2 months ago. "I want eyes on Red Veil," Torvek ordered. "You're not cleared." "I am now," came a voice from the rear bulkhead. Commander Elric from the Earthsphere Transition Bureau stepped forward, tossing a sealed data shard onto the central holopad. Clearance code glowed green. "Aegis control has been overridden by Stratcom Alpha. Red Veil is reinstated." Torvek walked to the console and entered his personal cipher. The holopad dissolved its perimeter locks. A model unfolded, nothing tactical, no armament specs, just a procedural network branching from audio sync pulses. At the base, a label in Earth Standard, linguistic corruption, directive null. "This isn't a virus in their code," Torvek said. "It's a mirror held up to their belief system." "What we insert doesn't break their systems, it breaks their interpretation of reality." Silence stretched between them like pressure in a sealed airlock. "How exactly do you plan to use it?" Elric asked. "Not yet," Rain murmured. "First, I need to know if they're still on the 72-hour cycle." Jora's hands moved quickly, calling up old signal trace patterns. "We lost access to their sync broadcasts after the REL collapse, but if we assume their religious fleet structure holds, then they'll ritual sync in 31 hours, Torvek finished, and if we time it right, we don't need to fire. We seed the infection inside their identity confirmation sequence. Not an attack, a misalignment, A question. Malik scoffed. You're suggesting we make them misunderstand themselves? I'm not suggesting anything, Torvik said. I'm acting, because no one else will. He turned away before a reply could come, coat dragging against the corridor wall as he moved back through the bunker. His hands didn't shake. He'd practiced this plan in simulations that never passed senior review, but the thought was already rooted deep. They had arrived to be seen. That was their flaw. Systems built on synchronized ritual crave witness, and what they craved could be distorted. In the comms bay, the Ravenet console was quiet, dead power lights blinking red along the sides. The relay system had been mothballed during the Martian integration crisis. Hidden in abandoned satellites and signal fragments, too low bandwidth for combat use, but perfect for sync corruption. Torvik slid his clearance shard into the console. The lights didn't flash, they simply turned green. "You're sure about this?" asked Elric behind him. "No," Torvik said, placing his hand against the biometric seal. "But we don't speak surrender. We never did." Outside, over Titan, the Dominion fleet didn't move. But every ship's onboard chronometer ticked closer to ritual hour. And Earth, silent and watched, reached for its only defense. Not firepower, not diplomacy. A virus not made to key. Ill, only to misalign. Only to make them believe the wrong thing at the right time. Only to fracture memory. That's what Red Veil was. Not a blade. A whisper in a doctrine that couldn't tolerate static. Torvik stared into the transmission logs. His own heartbeat matched the timing sync. There would be no explosion. There would be no last stand. There would be only a question. And for the Dominion, that was enough to start a collapse. "Cut the sky," Torvik ordered, and the signal grids obeyed. In less than 7 minutes, Earth's planetary uplink went black. Global comm towers dropped transmission. Civilian broadcasts looped outdated public service footage. Sensor stations from Luna to the Phobos archipelago powered down in staggered succession, following a pre-coded disruption cascade keyed into old cold protocol subroutines. The world didn't flicker. It vanished. From orbit, Earth's data signature collapsed like a stage curtain mid-play. Atmospheric reflectors stopped bouncing civilian pings. Lagrange point satellites rotated away from their target vectors. Even colony-bound merchant vessels were forced to run silent, held in transit with orders to drift or feign malfunction. The illusion wasn't abandonment, it was erasure. Inside the Dominion's forward relay grid, this blackout was interpreted exactly as intended. "They've shut down their global grid," the automated signal relay aboard Void Canonical reported. "Strategic collapse or fear-based lockdown likely. Ritual confirmation pending." Aboard the Dominion command decks, there was no celebration. There was calculation. Over on Earth, beneath reinforced layers of cryogenic insulation and kinetic shielding, the Aegis core burned with movement. Footfalls slapped against polished floors as deep core personnel poured into hardened war rooms not accessed in over a decade. Lights pulsed across ancient conduits reawakened from their freeze state. Ravenet, a network long abandoned and stored in auxiliary backups, was coming back to life. Torvik paced the length of a recessed operations pit, flanked by specialists wearing outdated mission colors, ones never reassigned after Red Veil was shelved. He glanced at the command display. A laser plasma array lit up across the far wall, detailing the dormant satellite shell positions scattered throughout the asteroid belt. They weren't weapons. They were listening posts, abandoned mining relays Earth had once deemed irrelevant. Until now. "Do we have transmission capability from Node 117, he asked. "Still decaying," replied Lieran. The communications engineer hunched over the relay deck. "But Node 98 is stable. We can piggyback off its fragment array." "Good. We use it to seed the signal drift." Across the room, Dr. Vess Halvran stepped into view. Older than the others, eyes sunken from long nights of interface translation, he carried a data slate covered in old Dominion neural pathways. Unlike Earth's linguistic models, Dominion communication was recursive, meaning lived in pattern loops, not word order. It made traditional AI decoding useless for over a decade. Halvorin had spent most of that time alone in an underground office 2 floors below the Antarctic core. He now held the key to the war they weren't firing. "You cracked it," Torvek said. "Part of it," Halvorin replied, tilting the display to show layered strands of Dominion ritual language. "Chain Echo 72. It's not a protocol. It's a reaffirmation sync. Their crews perform it every 72 hours to refresh shared belief. Not belief in victory, belief in themselves." Torvek stepped closer. "And we can intercept it?" "We can intercept the ritual framework," Halvorin confirmed. "The content isn't fixed. It's context-dependent, synthesized on board using shared memory packets. If we inject distortions into the foundational logic, early parable inversion, loyalty syntax with inverted triggers, we don't break the ritual, we bend it." Torvek turned to Elric, who had taken over relay node assignment. "Then we need a signal pool that mimics their own source formatting. Do we have Dominion rhythm models from the Archangel Vault?" "Enough to fool their front-end filters," Elric confirmed, "especially if we use signal decay to mask anomalies. Ravenet's old bandwidth limits might actually help." A sharp beep drew their attention. Jorah, now stationed at the delay interpolation console, spoke without looking up. "We're synced with Ghost Node 6. Drift calibration holding." Torvek approached the main control panel and stared at the cluster of dormant convoys, now alive again across the belt. They blinked in soft amber like lighthouses wrapped in ash. "We're not trying to erase their fleet," he said to the room. "We're trying to tilt the ground they stand on." A long pause followed. Then Halvorin, quiet and steady, added, "We won't be able to measure the impact in real time. Once the ritual sync begins, they won't broadcast anything until cycle end. If the infection works, we'll know by their silence. If it doesn't, they'll fire," Torvek finished, "and they'll fire with full ritual authorization." He stepped back from the display. The hum of ambient systems had been tuned out. What remained was the click of keystrokes, the dry swipe of fingers on glass, the breathless calm of a room daring not to hope. Jorah tapped a final command. "Seed packet is loaded into Ravenet queue," she announced. "Transmission timestamp confirmed. Drift begins in 14 minutes. Torvek crossed his arms. "Then lock the room. From now until drift ends, nothing leaves. No outbound data, no side-channel feeds, not a word to the civilian grid." Heads nodded. Commands echoed. The next phase was not about broadcast dominance or electromagnetic superiority. Earth wasn't trying to outpower the Dominion. We were trying to infect their certainty. And the Dominion's strength, its unquestioned layered belief in ritual self-identity, would become its weakness. Torvek remained still as the lights dimmed around him. The final countdown timer blinked in the corner of the heads-up display. 14 minutes became 12, then 10. Each second was a wire being tightened. Not around Earth, but around a belief system that couldn't survive doubt. Torvek glanced toward Halvorin. "Do you believe it'll work?" The older man didn't answer at first. Then, with slow, brutal calm, he said, "I believe in misinterpretation more than I believe in conquest." At 6 minutes, the room sealed. Outside, Earth had vanished from Dominion sensors. Inside, the infection was preparing to whisper. It didn't need to shout. It needed only to be misunderstood. "They've begun the cycle," said Jorah, eyes fixed on the heads-up display. The timestamp in the upper right quadrant of the plasma board blinked green. Dominion's 72-hour ritual sync had officially initiated. Unaware they were processing fragments Earth had rewritten in the shadows. Torvek stood without moving, fists locked behind his back. He didn't blink. Around him, the Aegis Corps' primary chamber pressed with silence, but not calm. The air was dense with restrained breath, condensation streaking the reinforced glass of the command layer, where the temperature had dropped 4 degrees in preparation for deep system cooling. They needed every ounce of computational margin for what came next. On the outer perimeter of the Tarsis Gate, 23 dead satellites began to drift. They weren't in orbit. They weren't even broadcasting on active lines. They had been angled weeks ago to appear like debris, non-functional husks set loose from Earth's old mining colonies. Each one rotated slowly, with random axis variants coded to match natural asteroid wobble. But inside their cores, Earth's oldest signal compressors were awake, carrying not sound, not attack, just ritual. Language that wasn't violent, language that wasn't foreign. It was almost dominion. "We have Echo," Halvran announced. On the command feed, Dominion's peripheral ships began syncing their ritual cycles. These weren't declarations. They were reaffirmations, cultural litanies meant to remind crews of origin, hierarchy, purpose. Inside Dominion doctrine, identity was memory preserved through rhythm. Earth had fractured that rhythm. The first signal contained a parable known to the Dominion fleets, a tale of origin involving the ancestral founder constructs and the trial of purity. But Earth's adapted version introduced a minor shift. A single conditional phrase reversed its context. Instead of promoting obedience to command structure, the parable now suggested that hesitation in the face of contradiction was virtue. The signal passed initial Dominion filters without rejection. Their fleet's neural language system accepted the syntax as valid. "What's the feedback loop doing?" Torvek asked. Lieren's response came immediately. "We're seeing recursive cycling on their ritual nodes. They've triggered authenticity checks on their own affirmations." Torvek turned toward Halvran. "Did we go too deep?" "No," Halvran replied. "We seeded ambiguity. That's not the same as contradiction. Their system is catching the distortion, but doesn't recognize it as corruption. They think it's their own logic unraveling." The second layer of Earth's drift signal followed 10 minutes later. This one altered the loyalty clause in a Dominion fleet protocol that defined rank inheritance. Instead of anchoring allegiance to a specific doctrine strand, the rewritten fragment pointed to a fragmented heuristic with 3 possible interpretations, all equally plausible under Dominion linguistic encoding. Ships began drifting slightly out of their designated grid formations. To an external observer, it might look like minor thruster adjustments or telemetry variants, but to the Dominion fleet itself it was a fracture in trust. Aboard Void canonical Dominion flagship, internal alerts began to register anomalies in node confirmation. Ritual echo signal, incomplete loop, detected, identity chain. Drift, 0.27% loyalty confirmation, conflict resolution triggered. Aboard the bridge, Fleet Executor Van Solmek activated the Echo Integrity Protocol, a fail-safe designed to verify the authenticity of ritual resonance across ship clusters. Once triggered, each ship would perform a local validation against the others. If discrepancies were detected, automated alignment routines would engage, forcing the ships to isolate any vessel that failed to meet verification thresholds. Earth's infection had anticipated this. Each distortion Earth sent into the sink was uniquely layered, meaning every Dominion ship received a slightly different fragment. Not enough to spark rejection, but enough to ensure none of them could confirm each other's purity. "They're spinning themselves," Elric whispered, watching Dominion fleet maps morph as ship clusters pulled apart, their validation pings locking others out. "They don't know which version is true." On Earth, nothing moved, no new signals, no broadcasts. The trap had already sprung, and all that remained was the spiral. "Their belief network's segmenting," Halvran confirmed. "It's like watching a religion try to excommunicate itself from all directions at once." Dominion command officers across multiple vessels began issuing soft isolation orders, closing off intership relays to prevent doctrinal contamination. Sub-fleets fragmented into separate operational blocks. Peripheral craft repositioned away from central clusters under the suspicion of command drift. On Void Canonical, Executor Solmek convened a closed ritual of second-line captains. Only 3 responded. The rest had locked their comm lines, citing doctrinal uncertainty and requesting independent purity anal. The Dominion had never trained for this. They were forged around synchrony, around echo, around certainty. Now each ritual echo returned a slightly different memory. Each affirmation loop carried a unique flaw, Each identity chain contradicted the others while still appearing legitimate to its own segment. "It's begun," Torvik said flatly. From the edge of the operations ring, a technician confirmed Dominion's central node had ceased outgoing ritual updates. The sync had been aborted mid-cycle. A silent pause had replaced what was usually a celebratory recommitment. Torvik didn't smile. "Begin level 2 monitoring," he ordered. "Do not send signal, do not reply, do not acknowledge. They're not in collapse yet, they're in doubt. That's where it starts." Halvrin leaned over the display, drawing slow, careful breath. "You ever heard of faith unmake itself?" he asked no one in particular. Jorah's fingers danced across her console, queuing up the next stage in Earth's layered assault. "Not yet," she said. "But we're about to." "Shut the lattice. No more confirmations," ordered High Orator Salvek, his voice stripped of its usual rhythm. On board the Void Canonical, Dominion Command Protocol was unraveling. Not in fire, in pause. The kind that creeps through military routine like mold in steel, quiet, creeping, irreversible. Fleet-wide sync, the ritual that once unified their doctrines across light years, had halted midstream. The parables were inconsistent. The affirmations disagreed. The identity echo was now a question answered 27 ways across 27 captains. Salvek stood motionless on the primary bridge, his ceremonial armor cast aside hours ago. The collar had constricted when his third subfleet commander refused to acknowledge a formation call, citing doctrinal dissonance. The orator stared at the central spire, where the Dominion script once rotated in seamless alignment. Now the glyphs stumbled, rotating into misalignment, reordering, halting. A subtle jitter in rhythm betrayed deeper fractures. "Bring forward the purity logs from the last cycle," he snapped. "Only the ones from our core vessels. Exclude outer ring data. I want clean resonance." A comms officer hesitated. "Sir, 3 of our own archive blocks have been flagged by internal audit for doctrinal recursion." "They..." "Flagged by whom?" "Each other, sir. Loop diagnosis from their own AI cores. Recursive contamination triggered them to initiate memory distancing." Salvek's lips twitched, a betrayal of nerves. He turned away from the display. Behind him, another command relay flared. A Dominion dread frigate from the Varric line had severed its link entirely, reporting ritual archive inconsistency before closing its verification beacon. No broadcast, no request for help. It went dark, completely. Earth didn't respond. Not a signal, not a single line of confirmation. The void between ships thickened, not in range but in trust. On board smaller Dominion vessels, paranoia settled into structure. Captains ordered internal realignment sessions, interrogating their crew's belief affirmations, cross-checking historical scripts, banning private memory syncs. The fear wasn't mutiny, it was misalignment. Every officer now feared his own crew might be following a false resonance path. Dominion Protocol had no word for heresy because heresy required deviation. This wasn't deviation, this was multiplicity. Earth's virus had given the Dominion something it had never encountered, and turd, equally valid fragmentation. Back on Earth, the Aegis core felt cold even though its reactors remained active. The low hum of ventilation masked the pressure settling over the room. "They're spinning in on themselves," said Elric, scrolling through the real-time desync log. "We're tracking 72% signal variation across all major Dominion command nodes." "And no reassertion attempts?" asked Torvik. "None," Jorah answered. "They're not transmitting correction pulses. They've shut down correction entirely. It's as if they're afraid to spread it further." Torvik rubbed a hand along his jaw, his stubble rasping beneath gloved fingertips. "They've quarantined belief. That's harder to cure than any physical virus." Dr. Halvrin leaned forward, placing a log slate on the table. "The Dominion's doctrine doesn't account for divergence. All alignment stems from shared memory chain logic. When that's corrupted, it doesn't split. There's no concept of minority faith. It simply denies itself, and when every chain contradicts the others, the entire structure stutters." He tapped the log again. "We seeded doubt, not contradiction. That's the brilliance. They can't isolate the virus because there's nothing to isolate. Each signal is self-validating. They're watching themselves fracture without cause. There's no enemy they can point to. That is how you kill certainty. Torvek didn't smile. We're not here to kill. No, Halvran agreed. But they are. Across the room, the heads-up display zoomed in on one of the Dominion's Western Fleet clusters. Subfleet 4A had pulled 200 kilometers out of formation, citing doctrinal misalignment with command protocols from Central Fleet orders. Within 2 hours, 6 more units echoed the maneuver, isolating themselves spatially. From above, it looked like planetary rings unraveling out of symmetry. Even their formations were betraying belief. In the Dominion's command architecture, movement wasn't just navigation, it was affirmation. Ships held position not for tactics, but to affirm doctrine. When formation collapsed, it wasn't strategy failing, it was faith. A Comtech looked up. They're rerouting all primary sync back through their reserve archive banks. If they continue this cycle, they'll overwrite their command core with disputed ritual layers. Torvek watched silently. Then finally, with cold finality, he said, "Let them burn in the light they lit." No one clapped. No one nodded. There was no celebration. The virus had no dramatic climax, no detonation. Earth didn't see wreckage, only the unfolding of internal suspicion. The Dominion wasn't falling to war, it was folding inward, denying itself access to trust. "Shall we prep a new injection?" asked Elric. Torvek shook his head. "No, we seeded once, nothing more. If we alter it again, we give them a pattern to trace. This was a single cut. Let it bleed naturally." Jorah lowered her voice. "Do we alert the planetary defense grid?" "Not yet," he replied. "They're not reacting. They're dissolving." The laser plasma board dimmed as the fleet diagrams lost shape. Markers faded or drifted. Several icons that once pulsed with affirming signals were now dim, isolated by internal Dominion lockdowns. Torvek stepped down from the control tier and walked the length of the observation hall, eyes tracing the silhouettes of a war that might never ignite. Halvran followed him a few steps. "What happens if they recover?" "Then they'll come. And if they don't?" Torvek stared through the shielded glass at the black nothing above Antarctica. "Then they'll remember this moment forever and never speak of it again." "They've broken formation. 2 dread frigates heading toward Ares Ring," said Jorah, her voice clipped but level. On the central laser plasma board inside Earth's, there's Aegis core. The Dominion markers peeled away from their disorganized fleet cloud. The dreadnoughts, Vorax Edict and Linekeeper Halvaran, moved in synchronized vectors, ignoring the drifting protocols around them. It was an unmistakable shift. 2 vessels had abandoned the doctrine feedback spiral and were executing a battlefield correction. That meant someone aboard those ships had overruled doctrinal delay. Someone was trying to reassert. Rain Torvek stood at the front of the command tier, arms folded, unmoving. He studied the movement carefully. The Dominion ships were accelerating, not at ramming pace, but with intent, aimed squarely toward the Ares Ring. A tethered orbital platform once used for asteroid logistics, the ring had been long since decommissioned, its interiors gutted and operations transferred to subterranean stations. From orbit, however, it looked exposed, unprotected, vulnerable. "They think it's a weakness," said Elric from behind. "They're baiting a clean win." "They're trying to anchor themselves," Torvek replied. "Recenter the narrative, a clear strike, publicly logged, clean affirmation of dominance. That gives them something to rally behind. And we left the ring looking functional on purpose. It was built for this." On board Vorax Edict, the crew engaged their victory protocol, an automated system that logged and distributed combat confirmation across the Dominion's internal communication lattice. The moment their systems registered orbital superiority over the ring, a fleet-wide broadcast went live. What they didn't know was that Earth had already taken control of the ring's transmitter grid. The communications hub, which once handled ore shipment manifests, had been reprogrammed weeks ago to do one thing: receive, invert, and reflect. As the Dominion's victory declaration echoed outward, Earth system caught it midstream. Edit. The three key elements of the signal chain and broadcasted it back along the same Dominion frequencies. The message that reached the fleet read as follows. Earth capitulates. Ares ring secured. Sovereignty transfer initiated. Ritual concludes in accord. The Dominion command grid absorbed the false message before any validation checks could catch the swap. Across the Dominion fleet, command crews received the declaration. Some hesitated. Others immediately forwarded it to their own verification nodes, cementing the illusion. In less than 90 seconds, nearly half the remaining vessels had accepted the false surrender as doctrine verified. The Dominion's ritual net, still fractured from the previous sync corruption, had no unified source to countermand it. Halvran's voice cracked from dry laughter. We didn't even tell a lie. We just repeated what they already believed. Jorah leaned closer to her display. Look at this. Internal Dominion cross-checks are triggering echo rejection loops. Their ships are quarantining each other again, this time over the surrender report. They think somebody faked it. They just don't know who, Elric muttered. The fleet map transformed in real time. Ships that had just begun repositioning into new formations abruptly halted. Several initiated soft restart rituals, which, in Dominion architecture, meant memory revalidation. Others cut external comms entirely, locking down to avoid contamination. It wasn't battle chaos. It was doctrinal confusion at cultural level. Torvek didn't flinch as two new Dominion signals winked off the board. One was a cruiser on the mid-rim flank, the other a command sloop that had been circling Void Canonical. Both had initiated hardcore resets, an emergency maneuver that wiped local memory clusters to restore base allegiance protocols. They're erasing their own memory chains, Halvran said in disbelief. That means their identity scaffolds have become unsalvageable. Inside Void Canonical, High Orator Salvek watched the breakdown unfold across his bridge display. Bozal and three of his own verification officers had refused to authenticate the Ares ring report. Two others had. The split wasn't by rank or chain of command, it was arbitrary. Worse, the fleet captains beneath his command weren't responding to unification pulses. Every echo Salvek sent returned modified. His own ritual authority was being processed differently ship by ship. He attempted override keys, none held. Every broadcast mirrored back distorted, misaligned, or incomplete. Lock down the ship, Salvek commanded. Purge external resonance channels. We contain until clarity returns. The command center followed orders, slamming into deep relay silence. Void Canonical's central ritual conduit, meant to guide Dominion cultural rhythm across sectors, was sealed. For the first time in Dominion history, the flagship had turned inward. On Earth, the command room felt like a pressure chamber after release. Jorah exhaled. Flagships out. Their ritual net lost its keystone. Torvek stepped back from the board. They won't trust any new signal now. Not ours, not their own. Elric sat slowly. How long until the fragmentation becomes irreversible? Halvran answered without looking up. It already is. The identity mesh was their operating spine, and it's severed. The next message they trust has to be perfect, unified, indisputable. But that's impossible now, because every ship has a different idea of truth. Torvek nodded. Then we don't need to speak again. He turned away, walking past the heads-up screens, now cluttered with looping Dominion errors. He passed engineers monitoring silence. He passed analysts charting belief fractures. He passed a world still pretending to be invisible. What Earth had broadcast was not a lie. It was simply the truth spoken through another voice, and it had shattered an empire. Commence ritual reset. Lock fleet to route-level purge. The voice of High Orator Salvek, hollow now and stripped of its reverence, echoed through the fractured corridors of Void Canonical. There was no ceremonial cadence, no accompanying glyphs burned into the ritual spire. What once served as a spiritual invocation to cleanse impurity now sounded like a technician's final command before cutting power to a broken grid. From the flagship's command platform, confirmation pulses were dispatched to every Dominion ship still listening. The fleet-wide ritual reset, an emergency failsafe buried deep in Dominion architecture, was not designed to repair battle damage or override tactical decisions. It was meant to restore belief. The Dominion, having lost alignment, was turning inward to find itself again. Across the Dominion formation, vessels received the reset command and began shutdown sequences. Ritual archives unspooled, memory vaults isolated their active chains. AI clusters initiated recursive scanning protocols to validate ancestral coding. That was Earth's trigger. In Aegis Core, Jorah sat motionless at the root console, the glow of the plasma board flickering across her clenched jaw. The heads-up display confirmed it. Signal match identified. Event key R17A. The payload was live. Back during the first signal injection, Earth's linguists had embedded a recursive clause into the Dominion's ritual sync, a phrase inserted not to corrupt, but to lie dormant. It was buried within a valid parable, repeated in the rhythm of loyalty, passed through each confirmation cycle without ever being questioned, until now. The clause read, "If doubt arises from memory, return to the mirror that cast it." In Dominion semantics, that line wasn't poetic, it was executable, a logic prompt. The reset command activated it. Now every ship running the purge wasn't simply clearing its protocol, as it was questioning their origin. The recursive loop did not break the system, it sent it into an unending chain of references, each logic point chasing the next, each validation pointing back at its own creation, looping into ambiguity. Fleet AI clusters initiated self-examination, tracing ritual code back through storage trees that suddenly contradicted one another. Jorah whispered into her headset, "It's holding. Recursive drift confirmed on central nodes." Onboard linekeeper Halvoran, a Dominion dreadnought, the AI refused to exit standby. The ship's logic system flagged its command data as unreliable, refusing crew override. All control interfaces locked. Status monitors showed all systems functional, except belief. Without validated ritual logic, the vessel refused to act. 3 decks below, Commander Selvek pounded the access rail beside the core interface. "Force it! Restart on last known doctrine template." "No response," replied the technician. "Root identity is misaligned. It doesn't recognize command origin." On Vorok's edict, the loop yielded a different result. Instead of halting, the system defaulted to an older version of Dominion protocol, an ancestral script long retired but still preserved for ceremonial redundancy. The ship's crew suddenly found themselves staring at banners and memory prompts they hadn't seen in decades. Loyalty clauses once reserved for pre-expansion unity chants now dictated operational behavior. Elsewhere in the fleet, confusion reached catastrophic levels. Some ships halted completely, entering silent defensive postures, unable to determine whether orders they received were valid or hostile. Others engaged in emergency ritual readings, bypassing AI layers altogether, demanding that command personnel manually recite core belief scripts in an attempt to reassert unity. But even those failed. Earth's recursive clause had spread like a hidden crack through the crystal of certainty. With every reading, a new contradiction surfaced. Was the parable of binding taught with the trial of ends, or the trial of origins? Both were documented. Both were verifiable. Yet they negated each other, and neither could be disproven. In Aegis Core, Halvoran pulled data from the recursive logic monitor, shaking his head as new signatures flooded in. "They've hit paradox collapse," he said. "This isn't identity fracture anymore. This is core semantic dissociation." Torvek stood still as ice. "How many are reverting to ancestral alignment?" "Not enough to unify. Too many to stabilize. Each ship's now a capsule of belief, some clinging to ancient dogma, others trapped in verification loops, some locked down entirely, none trusting the others." Across the Dominion fleet it looked like paralysis. Ships drifted, formation markers dimmed, communications between units dropped below traceable bandwidth. Even the void canonical, beacon of the Dominion's command culture, stood isolated, sealed from its own children. Salvek stared into the ritual spire, now dark. His crew sat in full posture, hands locked behind their backs, each officer waiting for orders that wouldn't come. His final message, unsent, remained on the interface. We return to route. Let clarity burn the false. It was never sent, because clarity never came. Back on Earth, Jorah logged the collapse pattern. Her screen flooded with status tags, AI paralysis, memory recursion, command isolation, belief quarantine, recursive dissociation, legacy fallback, all markers confirming one thing: no action, no war. Elric leaned in. Still no retaliation? Not even a broadcast, she replied. Torvek turned from the display, his gaze distant, voice low. They weren't built to survive doubt. No weapons had fired. It hadn't struck a single hull. And yet the most structured fleet in the known systems now floated, unmoored by anything visible, brought to stillness not by lasers or drones, but by language planted inside belief, a fracture beneath the skin of gods. And Earth remained silent. Contact lost with Halvaran. Signal terminated from its own side. Elric's report landed like a stone on the Aegis Core operations floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was already silent, already still, already staring at the heads-up boards where Dominion identifiers had been vanishing one by one, without damage, without distress, without pattern. The fleet wasn't withdrawing. It was dissolving. Rain Torvek leaned over the primary console, his hands flat against the frame, as if anchoring the moment in place. One by one, Dominion signatures were blinking out. Some initiated internal shutdown protocols. Others drifted far enough from their last vectors that orbital recalculations lost them entirely. The AI wasn't registering them as threats anymore. It wasn't even classifying them as active. They simply became artifacts, fleet debris without action or signal. There's no retreat signal, said Jorah, scrolling through the upper-tier feed. Nothing resembling a fallback. No rally codes, no affirmations. They aren't returning. They're ending. Torvek didn't answer. Not yet. On the outer perimeter of Earth's orbital boundary, automated tug drones moved into position for a recovery sequence already scheduled days ago. The 6 civilian transports taken hostage during the initial blockade still drifted, anchored near Lagrange Point 3. No Dominion vessel hovered nearby, no guards had stayed behind. The recovery crews boarded without resistance. Their reports streamed in, no external tampering, systems intact. Passenger biosigns normal, no signs of trauma. Dominion boarding. Crew abandoned ship mid-cycle. Logs end with synchronized silence. In the captain's archive of one transport, Galvest Stazione, a final entry was discovered. Dominion officers had gathered in the forward navigation hold, removed their armor, and entered meditation cycles in formation. The biometric monitors showed no signs of harm, illness, or stress reaction. They'd simply stopped acting. They were waiting for confirmation that would never arrive. Torvek reviewed the report without commentary. He passed the slate back and stared at the black, starless window behind the board. Somewhere in that black hung hundreds of Dominion ships, still powered, still intact, engines idling or dormant, crews locked inside thought loops they could no longer escape. Earth's global signal networks came online an hour later. Public feeds resumed normal schedule. Traffic between colonies resumed without fanfare. The orbital relays linked, relit, rebalanced. No broadcast went out about what had happened, no address, no briefing, no headline. Inside Aegis Core, the last meeting of Operation Red Veil was held with the same number of seats it began with, none added, none removed. Halvaran stood before the strategic assembly with a neutral expression, hands behind his back, voice flat. Final cycle logs from Dominion vessels show increasing philosophical recursion. Half the ships that shut down did so because their AI logic collapsed under self-referencing loops. The others simply chose stasis. Conscious choice? Asked Rendalk, the Assembly's communications chief. Belief-driven silence, Halvran clarified. If you can't prove purity, you don't act. They held to their rulebook, even as it erased them. The Assembly said nothing. Torvek was the last to speak. Seal the file. Red Veil ends now. All records go into deep vault. No leaks, no versions for history books, no repeat attempts. Jorah blinked. That's it? We won? No, we didn't. Torvek shook his head. Add slowly. Victory would imply a contest. They never understood we weren't trying to beat them. We offered a question. They answered it with disappearance. Halvran glanced toward the edge of the table. There's going to be pressure. Internal, external. You'll be offered the chair again. The council will want to turn this into doctrine. I decline, Torvek said without pause. You'll refuse leadership? We defended ambiguity. That's harder than defending territory. He stepped away from the table, coat pulled tight over his shoulders. His breath steamed faintly in the cold chamber air. What do we tell the public? Elric asked. Torvek didn't stop walking. Nothing. Let them think the storm passed. Let them forget we opened a silence loud enough to swallow gods. Outside the core, the orbital scanners tracked a few remaining Dominion ships still drifting. Some blinked beacon pings every few hours, not as communication, but as habit. A few slowly rotated, crew probably unaware that movement no longer meant relevance. Others were frozen, orientation unchanged, their final navigational logs set to standby. Earth filed them as inert artifacts. No flag was raised. No monument was planned. The Dominion had not surrendered. They had simply removed themselves. And Earth remained. Quiet, whole, watching, waiting for the echo to fade. Insert the delay. The technician looked up from his terminal. His eyes scanned Torvek's face for hesitation. There was none. Just the steady weight of decision made days ago, waiting for its moment. He keyed in the command. A soft chime confirmed activation. All global communications, civilian, military, academic, diplomatic, now carried an imperceptible 3-second delay. It didn't break timing. It didn't trip security systems or interfere with bandwidth. Every human device processed it without friction. But for Dominion legacy architecture, it was something else entirely. A phantom loop. Rain Torvek stepped back from the console and turned toward the observation alcove. Through the pressure glass, Earth's orbital lattice shimmered in morning eclipse. The sky held no ships. The stars hung without motion. But somewhere beyond, the remnants of a fleet that once demanded obedience still drifted in a state they didn't understand. "This won't trigger retaliation?" asked Elric, voice low, wary. "No," said Torvek. "It's not a message. It's a task, something their systems can't complete." Halvran moved beside him. He held a datasheet showing long-term Dominion signal behavior, dozens of relay traces across defunct sectors, all flagging one common anomaly: loop persistence. Their legacy nodes will try to scrub it, but the delay is non-destructive. It doesn't trigger alarms, it doesn't carry payloads, it sits, unfinished. They'll recompile their protocols around it, waste cycles correcting what isn't wrong. Some might adapt, some won't, but they'll never remove it. "It's harmless," said Jorah. "So why does it feel like punishment?" Torvek didn't answer immediately. His attention remained fixed on the silent sky. "It's not punishment," he finally said. "It's presence. We left a scar that doesn't bleed." In the days following the fleet's disappearance, no formal treaties were signed. No galactic channel acknowledged what had happened. The Dominion issued no statements because none of its internal communication paths had recovered. The few fringe colonies that remained online began routing data through ancient cargo corridors, bypassing damaged ritual encoding altogether. One outpost, located on the edge of the Frayne corridor, attempted to broadcast toward Earth. The signal was clean, direct, and brief. When Earth responded, automated, neutral, innocuous, it arrived 3 seconds late. Their reply was never resent. Inside the Strategic Assembly's cold archive chambers, Halvren placed the final copy of Operation Red Veil into a thermal-sealed containment cylinder. Once locked, it would descend through 10 layers of magnetic compression before vanishing into the data vault where only seismic keys could retrieve it. He pressed the seal shut. The cylinder clicked once, then sank out of sight. "Do you think someone will try it again?" Jorah asked, standing beside him. "With us or against us?" Halvren replied. "Either." He folded his hands behind his back. "Maybe. But I doubt they'll understand what made it work. It wasn't the code, it wasn't the strategy, it was the silence. Most people think power is speech. We made it hesitation." Outside the vault, the lights in Aegis Core dimmed to standby levels. No one celebrated. No banners were raised. The only public update was a signal from the Global Communications Directorate announcing full restoration of all channels. There was no mention of the delay, no need. For humans, it was functionally invisible. For the Dominion, it would never stop echoing. They would adapt, eventually. Their architects would issue new doctrine trees, modified sync anchors, maybe even abandon the oldest ritual codes. But every time a legacy system was reactivated, every time a memory chain realigned, the delay would reappear. 3 seconds. Dead space. Harmless, but unerasable. Like a smudge on the lens of a telescope. Small, irrelevant, but always in view. Rain Torvek exited the Assembly's lower concourse without security escort. No entourage followed. No reporters waited at the gates. He carried no briefcase, no data pad. Just the rhythm of his boots against the stone walkway that wrapped around the inner hull of the Antarctica facility. A junior technician passed him, paused, then saluted stiffly. Torvek didn't return it. Not out of arrogance. Out of refusal to mythologize a victory he didn't claim. Near the Tur ledge, Elric caught up with him. He walked in silence for several paces before speaking. "The council asked again this morning." Torvek glanced sideways. "The chair." Elric nodded. "They'll keep asking," Torvek said. "And you'll keep refusing." Torvek exhaled. "I didn't lead them into glory. I led them into a question." "You think that's less valuable?" "I think it's harder to explain." They reached the edge of the walkway, where the glass wall curved upward into polar darkness. Above, faint glints marked where old Dominion satellites had begun drifting again. Reawakened by low-orbit rotation triggers, their memory buffers still intact, still processing. "Will they try again?" Elric asked. Torvek stared upward. "They can't. Because to try again, they'd have to first admit we spoke a language they didn't recognize. And if someone else listens?" Torvek's expression didn't change. "Then they'll inherit the delay." The last record in Earth's strategic broadcast log was not a message. It was a pause, silent, unmarked, embedded into the rhythm of global data traffic. Every signal, every transmission, every response bore the same invisible weight. A hesitation. Not a threat, not a flag. A void. Left behind not to challenge, but to remind. The final entry in Red Veil's classified journal was etched into a sealed instruction wafer, accessible only by full assembly vote. It read, "Surrender is a language we never learned." And now, they can't forget it. What would you have done if you were in Torvek's place? Would you have stayed silent, or demanded the galaxy remember your name? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want thrilling HFY stories, hit that subscribe button now.